The Johnsons were the picture of success. Living in a spacious home in the suburbs, both Mr. and Mrs. Johnson thrived in their careers. Mr. Johnson as a corporate lawyer and Mrs. Johnson as a medical consultant. Despite their professional accomplishments, their greatest pride lay in their two boys, Ryan, a curious and imaginative 7-year-old, and Caleb, their bubbly 4-year-old. But as their careers grew, so did their workloads. Late nights at the office became the norm, and the couple struggled to balance their demanding jobs with the needs of their children. That was when Chioma entered their lives. Chioma came highly recommended by a trusted friend. She was a young woman in her mid-20s with a warm smile and a soft-spoken demeanor. During the interview, she seemed perfect, polite, hardworking, and eager to please. "I'll treat your children like my own," she had said, her eyes filled with sincerity. The Johnsons were convinced they'd found the perfect fit. "She's going to be such a blessing," Miss Johnson told her husband later that night, and for a while she was right. The Johnson household buzzed with activity on the morning Chioma arrived. The boys, Ryan and Caleb, raced around the living room, their laughter filling the air as their parents prepared for yet another busy workday. Mrs. Johnson glanced at the clock, her heart racing. She had an early meeting, and Mr. Johnson was scheduled to give a presentation downtown. The usual chaos was amplified, and they both silently wondered how much longer they could keep up with this balancing act. When the doorbell rang, Mrs. Johnson practically sprinted to open it. Standing there was Chioma, a young woman in her mid-20s, clutching a small bag and smiling shyly. Her neatly tied headscarf and well-ironed dress gave an immediate impression of someone organized and reliable. She exuded calm, a stark contrast to the whirlwind inside the house. "Good morning, Ma," Chioma said softly, her voice gentle yet confident. "I'm Chioma. I hope I'm not too early." "Not at all," Mrs. Johnson replied, relief evident in her voice. "Come in, please." Chioma's calm demeanor immediately put Miss Johnson at ease. As they sat in the dining room for her interview, Chioma answered every question with thoughtfulness and care. She spoke of her experience working with children and how much she enjoyed helping families manage their homes. "I love children," Chioma said, her eyes lighting up. "There's nothing more rewarding than seeing a child smile because of something you've done for them." Miss Johnson felt her shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. She exchanged a glance with her husband, who gave a slight nod. They had interviewed other candidates before, but no one had felt quite like this. Chioma seemed genuine, warm yet professional. She even offered to start that very day, knowing how overwhelmed the family was. "Thank you," Mrs. Johnson said sincerely. "We could really use the help." Ryan and Caleb peeked curiously around the corner as Chioma unpacked her belongings in the guest room. Caleb, the younger of the two, was the first to approach her, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. "Who are you?" he asked boldly. Chioma crouched down to his level, smiling warmly. "I'm Chioma. I'm going to help your mummy and daddy take care of you and your brother." Ryan hung back, watching from a distance. He wasn't sure what to make of the new arrival, but Caleb's immediate comfort around her helped him feel a little more at ease. Within an hour, Chioma had worked her way into the boys' hearts. She joined their game of hide and seek, her laughter blending with theirs as they darted around the house. Even Ryan, who was usually shy around new people, found himself laughing when Chioma pretended to lose Caleb during the game. By the time Mrs. Johnson returned from her meeting, the house was tidier than it had been in weeks. The boys were happily occupied, and Chioma was already preparing lunch. "She's amazing," Mrs. Johnson whispered to her husband later that evening. "I think we've found the perfect person." Over the next few weeks, Chioma became a fixture in the Johnson household. She had a way of making everything seem effortless. The laundry was always done, the floors spotless, and the boys were cared for in ways that made Miss Johnson's heart swell with gratitude. Chioma even found creative ways to keep the boys entertained, from building pillow forts to teaching them simple songs and games. "Ryan, what's 1 plus 2? Chioma asked one afternoon, pointing to a set of blocks on the floor. 3, Ryan exclaimed proudly, grinning when Chioma clapped her hands in approval. "See, you're so smart," Chioma said, beaming. Mrs. Johnson watched from the doorway, a smile spreading across her face. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. Even Mr. Johnson, who rarely had time to interact with the house staff, noticed the positive change. "She's really good with the boys," he remarked one evening. "I didn't expect them to warm up to her so quickly." Mrs. Johnson nodded, feeling a sense of relief she hadn't realized she needed. "It's like she was made for this job," she said. The boys quickly grew attached to Chioma. Caleb, in particular, became her shadow, following her around the house as she worked. He loved the way she sang while folding laundry, her voice soft and soothing. Ryan, though a little more reserved, also enjoyed her company. Chioma helped him with his homework, patiently explaining things in a way that made him feel confident. "You're really good at math," Chioma told him one day, ruffling his hair. "I bet you'll be an engineer when you grow up." Ryan blushed, feeling proud. It wasn't often that someone outside of his family praised him like that. Caleb adored the way Chioma gave him extra attention, carrying him on her hip as she tie-dyed up, or letting him sit on her lap during story time. "You're my favorite, Chioma," he declared one evening, his arms wrapped tightly around her neck. Chioma laughed, kissing the top of his head. "And you're my favorite little prince." Ryan, watching from the other side of the room, smiled at the exchange but felt a tiny pang of jealousy. He pushed it aside, telling himself it didn't matter. Caleb was younger, after all. It made sense that Chioma would dote on him more. As time went on, the Johnsons relied on Chioma more and more. They trusted her completely, often leaving her in charge while they worked late or attended social events. "She's so dependable," Miss Johnson told her sister during a phone call. "I don't know how we managed without her." Their trust extended to financial matters as well. Mrs. Johnson gave Chioma access to the household budget, confident that she would manage it responsibly. Chioma, for her part, handled the responsibility with grace, never giving the couple any reason to doubt her. "I'm so grateful for her," Mrs. Johnson said one evening as she watched Chioma play with the boys. "She's like a gift." Little did they know that the gift they had welcomed so wholeheartedly would soon become their greatest nightmare. At first, the favoritism was subtle. Ryan didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could feel it. Chioma still played with him and Caleb, still smiled at them both, but the warmth in her eyes seemed reserved for Caleb alone. When she praised Caleb, her voice was light and cheerful, her words overflowing with affection. With Ryan, her tone was clipped, her compliments rare and half-hearted. Ryan began noticing little things that made his stomach twist. When Caleb wanted a snack, Chioma would fetch it immediately, smiling as she handed it to him. If Ryan asked for the same, Chioma would sigh loudly and say, "You're old enough to get it yourself." Caleb, too young to understand the unfairness, giggled and munched away, while Ryan sat quietly, pretending it didn't bother him. "Maybe she just likes Caleb more because he's younger," Ryan thought one evening as he lay in bed. "That's okay. I'm the big brother. I can handle it." But the ache in his chest told a different story. It didn't take long for the divide to grow. Chioma began finding fault in everything Ryan did, no matter how small. If he accidentally left his toys scattered on the floor, she'd scold him harshly. "Ryan, you're not a baby anymore. Clean up after yourself." But if Caleb left his toys out, she would chuckle softly and say, "Oh, Caleb, you're such a little rascal." Ryan started dreading her disapproval. He tried harder to be neat, to be quiet, to be invisible, but nothing he did seemed good enough. Caleb, on the other hand, could do no wrong. If Caleb spilled water on the table, Chioma would quickly grab a cloth and clean it up, saying, "It's okay, my little prince. Accidents happen." But when Ryan accidentally knocked over a cup of juice, her face would twist with annoyance. "Ryan, be more careful. You're too old to be this clumsy." It wasn't just her words, it was her eyes. The way she looked at him, with irritation or disdain, made him feel small. He wanted to tell his parents, but every time he thought about it, fear stopped him. What if they thought he was just being jealous? What if they didn't believe him? Ryan could have handled Chioma's favoritism if it hadn't begun to seep into his relationship with Caleb. The brothers had always been close. Ryan loved teaching Caleb new games, showing him how to draw, and protecting him when he got scared. But Chioma seemed determined to drive a wedge between them. One afternoon, Ryan and Caleb were playing with toy cars in the living room. Ryan had set up a makeshift racetrack using books and pillows, and the boys were laughing as they raced their cars down the track. Chioma walked in, her arms crossed. "Caleb," she said sweetly, "are you sure Ryan's letting you win? He always wants to be the best." Caleb paused, his tiny hands clutching his car. "Ryan's not cheating," he said hesitantly. Chioma smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "You're too little to notice when he does. Maybe you should play by yourself so it's fair." Ryan's heart sank as Caleb stood up and walked away with his car. "I wasn't cheating," Ryan mumbled, but Chioma was already busy praising Caleb for making a smart choice. That day, Ryan sat alone, staring at the racetrack he had built, wondering what he had done to make Chioma turn Caleb against him. As days turned into weeks, Caleb began parroting Chioma's words. "Ryan, don't touch my toys," he said one morning, pulling his action figure away. "Chioma says you're always breaking things." "I didn't break anything," Ryan said, his voice barely above a whisper. But Caleb wasn't listening. He ran off to find Chioma, leaving Ryan alone once again. Ryan tried to explain to Caleb, tried to tell him that Chioma was lying, but Caleb was too young to understand. "Chioma loves me," Caleb said proudly. "She said I'm her favorite." Hearing those words felt like a punch to Ryan's chest. He didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he knew it was true. Despite everything, Ryan still clung to the hope that he and Caleb could be close again. One evening, as Chioma was cooking dinner, Ryan found Caleb in their bedroom, building a tower with blocks. "Can I play too?" he asked softly. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. For a while it felt like old times. They laughed as they built the tallest tower they could, their bond rekindling with every block they placed. But the moment was short-lived. Chioma's voice called from downstairs. "Caleb, come here. I need you." Caleb jumped up, knocking over the tower in his rush to leave. Ryan sat alone, staring at the scattered blocks, the warmth of their connection fading once again. The divide between the brothers grew deeper, and Ryan's isolation intensified. One day, while the boys were playing tag, Ryan accidentally bumped into Caleb, who fell to the floor and started crying. Chioma rushed in immediately, scooping Caleb into her arms. "What did you do to him?" she demanded, glaring at Ryan. "It was an accident," Ryan said, his voice trembling. "We were just playing." Chioma didn't believe him. "You're always so rough. Go to the hallway closet and stay there until you learn to be gentle." Ryan's eyes widened. "The closet? But..." "No buts." Chioma snapped, her voice cold and unforgiving. She grabbed his arm and marched him to the dark, narrow space. "Stay here until I say you can come out." Ryan sat in the darkness, tears streaming down his face. He could hear Caleb's cries fading as Chioma carried him away, her voice soft and soothing. "Don't worry, my little prince. I won't let anyone hurt you." Ryan clenched his fists, anger and sadness swirling inside him. How had it come to this? How had Chioma turned his family against him? That night, after Chioma had gone to bed, Ryan whispered to Caleb in the darkness of their shared room, "Do you remember when we used to play together all the time? Before Chioma came?" Caleb stirred, his small voice uncertain. "Yeah." "Do you miss it?" Ryan asked, his voice cracking. "Do you miss being my best friend?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Then, in a small, hesitant voice, he said, "Chioma says you don't like me anymore." "That's not true," Ryan said, his heart breaking. "I love you, Caleb. You're my brother. Don't believe her lies." Caleb rolled over, looking at Ryan through the dim light of the room. "Really?" "Really," Ryan said, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'll always love you, no matter what." For the first time in weeks, Caleb reached out and held Ryan's hand. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to reignite the bond they shared. Ryan sat on his bed, clutching his favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out teddy bear named Max. The house was quiet, except for the faint hum of the TV downstairs, where Chioma was watching her favorite soap opera. Ryan's cheek still stung from the slap she had given him earlier that day. He had spilled a cup of water while trying to pour some for Caleb, and Chioma had flown into a rage. "Why are you always so clumsy?" she had yelled, her hand striking his face before he even had a chance to apologize. The slap hurt, but it wasn't just the physical pain. It was the humiliation, the helplessness, the growing fear that no one would ever believe him. Ryan wanted to tell his parents. He rehearsed the words in his head every night. "Chioma is mean to me when you're not home. She locks me in the closet. She hits me." But every time he thought about saying it aloud, the same doubts crept in. What if they thought he was lying? Chioma was so good at pretending to be kind and gentle. She always smiled when his parents were around, always spoke to him in a sweet voice when they were within earshot. Would his parents believe him over her? And then there was Caleb. Chioma adored Caleb, and Caleb adored her in return. Ryan couldn't bear the thought of his little brother turning against him. What if Caleb thought he was making it all up? What if he stopped trusting Ryan completely? So Ryan stayed silent, burying the truth deep inside. The house no longer felt like home. For Ryan, it was a place of constant tension, where he had to tiptoe around Chioma to avoid her wrath. He avoided playing with Caleb if Chioma was nearby, knowing she would twist the situation to make him look like the bad guy. He stopped asking for snacks or help with his homework, afraid that even the smallest request would irritate her. One afternoon, Caleb asked Ryan to play hide and seek. Ryan hesitated, glancing nervously toward the kitchen where Chioma was washing dishes. "I don't think I can," he said quietly. "Why not?" Caleb asked, his face falling. "You always play with me." Ryan didn't know how to explain it. How could he tell his little brother that he was scared? That he didn't want to give Chioma another reason to be angry? "I just don't feel like it," he said finally. Caleb shrugged and ran off to play by himself, but Ryan felt the familiar ache of loneliness settling in his chest. He missed his brother. He missed feeling safe. At night, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts raced as he replayed the events of the day, trying to understand why Chioma treated him the way she did. What had he done to make her hate him so much? Was he really as bad as she made him feel? "Some nights," he cried quietly into his pillow, careful not to wake Caleb. Other nights he hugged Max tightly, whispering to the teddy bear, as if it could somehow make things better. "It's not fair," he would say, his voice trembling. I didn't do anything wrong. But no matter how much he tried to reason with himself, the fear and sadness never went away.